Welcome to What I Wish I Knew at 30. Today on What I Wish I Knew at 30, we're joined by the powerhouse of positivity himself, Victor Perton. Globally recognized as the optimism guy, Victor is the CEO of the Centre for Optimism, a former Victorian MP, diplomat, and one of the world's most passionate voices on optimistic leadership, mental well-being, and high performance mindset. For decades, Victor has interviewed thousands of leaders and innovators, uncovering, I think, one key truth. Optimism is the strongest predictor of success, resilience, and influence. In this episode, he shares, well, I'm not sure what he's going to share, but he shares what he knew at 30 about confidence, courage, and building a life fueled by possibility rather than fear. And if you're searching for inspiration, leadership wisdom, emotional strength, or a science-backed mindset boost, this is your episode. So let's dive in with the unstoppable force for good, Victor Perton. Victor, welcome to What I Wish I Knew at 30.
Fran, look, it is such a joy to be here. And, you're a relentless optimist. You're infectiously optimistic. But your questions, I've got to say, when I look at them, I think, I don't want to tell myself what I should do at 30, but I reckon we're going to have an interesting time because you really made me think in the preparation for this conversation.
I love that. And so many people that I've interviewed. Last week, I interviewed Jim Penman from the Jim's Group, wonderfully optimistic. And just, really so many people have said to me, wow, those questions really got me. And I've really had to think about going back to when I was 30. So let's do that. Victor, you're 30 years old again. Where are you? What are you doing? And what's going through your mind at that stage of life?
Well, at 30, I had just been elected to the Parliament of Victoria. And so I'd given my maiden speech. So I went back and had a look at my maiden speech, which was very idealistic and quite powerful. 30 years ago, at age 30, I was settling into being a member of Parliament, all of the stuff that goes with that, on the media, speaking at public meetings. I had door knocked my entire electorate. So at that point, I was fresh with the ideas and the welcomes, thousands of people. You knock on someone's door and you say, I'm campaigning for Parliament. They'll invite you in for a coffee or a tea or a beer. And so my mind was full of all of those conversations. And then at the same time in the world, you had the collapse of the Soviet Union starting, the Berlin Wall falling, and my parents were Latvian and Lithuanian refugees. My grandmother had been a prisoner in the Gulag. My grandfather had been executed by the KGB. So, there was this mixture of my personal excitement, but there was also a personal excitement for what I would call my people, who were working to liberate themselves from one of the most vicious dictatorships in human history. That was a
Wow.
really interesting time. And I remember reading, The End of History by Fukuyama, and it made sense to me that, we were going to have a democratic future. I'd come back from studying in China. I'd been at Peking University, and I was pretty convinced that the People's Republic of China was going to collapse too, under the contradictions of being a political dictatorship, but trying to do economic freedom. So when I think back to what I was thinking at 30,
Mm.
God, it was an exciting time, Fran.
And it's a really significant time in life. When you think about everything that was going on then, and you go back to that, do you think that for you as a Victorian MP, did you feel that you had life figured out, or were you just winging it?
It's a great question. I think I still am.
Do you really?
I've got a clear sense of purpose. I know where I'm heading, what I believe in. But I even think back to then, I looked at that speech I gave 2 months before my 30th birthday. And, I was quoting Robert Menzies, who said, "We called the party Liberal because we've determined to be progressive and not reactionary." So, I have that state of mind of political philosophy,
Yeah.
of believing in the individual, being progressive, not reactionary. My religious faith was, I'm not down on my knees every day, but, I was pretty clear on what I believed. And, through my mother, my experience of Hinduism and Buddhism and Catholicism, that respect for spiritual beliefs. So I think I was pretty clear on that. And that remains so. I think probably the only thing I'm clearer on now is the absolute power of optimism and infectious optimism. And maybe it's even more important now. If you look back historically, Australia was a much more optimistic country in 1988 when I turned 30. So, and like the rest of the English speaking world, there's been a deterioration. In some senses, because maybe we're just too affluent. It's just too good. How many fridges do you need? How many bathrooms does a person need? How many four-wheel drives does a
Mm,
person need? And so I think that question of yours on winging it is society's changed. If I think back to when I was 30, we thought that democracy was going to prevail. I
mm.
still think democracy is going to prevail, but we are looking, in the eyes of some of the nastiest dictators in the world and who are exerting their power, as we see every night on the television as they fire missiles into Ukraine. So that winging it is, yeah, I'm pretty flexible and adept at staying in touch with what's going on in the world and how to apply my values to what I can do about it. I'm probably a bit
Mhm.
clearer now that I can't change the whole world, that I can only change myself, and through myself change one person at a time. So I think that's probably the great revelation. I think when I was 30, I thought I was going to change the world. Now I'm clearer that I can only do that one person at a time.
And you do that. You do change one person at a time. But I think that also is the collective, isn't it? Because when you start with one, the ripple effect affects the collective. And that's, that I don't know, with religion and all the different, I love that you were saying that your mother introduced you to all of those different sort of belief systems and spirituality. And I think that's really, I'm seeing people coming back to that connection, that spiritual connection. And it's good to see that younger people are actually, young men, young women are becoming more involved, not perhaps in the old traditional. I was brought up a Catholic. So, I mean, we were at Mass every day in the morning as a little Catholic school. And I love that. I love that tradition. I love that it gave me a love for public speaking because at a very young age we were able to do that. But I love that connective. I don't know what's up there or, sort of what's going on, but I do know that having an interest in all different types of belief systems is a good thing when you see what's going on in the world
I'm
and having
like you.
respect for that.
I was talking to some children the other day, who were in grade 4 in a little Catholic school, and I still remember Mrs. Skian, who seemed to be ancient at the time,
It
but
was
she's got
37.
us to do the Angelus at
Oh, wow.
midday. The angel of the Lord declared unto
Yeah.
Mary. I can still recite the Angelus. So I do love the smells and bells.
Yeah.
In July, I was in England. My daughter was rowing at Henley, and they had a sort of closed camp for the first few days. So I took the train to Norwich. I've made hundreds of speeches on optimism, quoting Mother Julian or Lady Julian of Norwich, who was a 1300s author and mystic.
Yeah.
And I went there and I stayed in the old convent at the in the grounds of the
Cathedral.
church, and I prayed in the cell. The priest did the morning, the Anglican morning prayers, and
Yeah.
it was only him and me.
Oh,
He was
beautiful.
not overwhelmed, but it was so funny. They invited me to a church service at a sister parish in Norwich, and high church over high church, 5 priests, a guy twirling the incense burner, a choir, and the great thing was I could almost convert to Anglicanism. They had champagne and strawberries to end the day.
Well, if that doesn't make you optimistic, Victor, I don't know what will.
It's true, but, yeah, and again, as you've said, I mean, I love going to Hindu temples, I love Buddhist rituals, and, when I was a member of parliament, the local mosque would invite me several times a year to pray with the men, and so, yeah, so for me, all of those rituals of religion that go back, probably 100,000 years or more in human history, I think there's so much to it, and meditation, as you mentioned, Fran.
Mm,
I my deepest meditations, you sometimes almost feel you're touching God.
yeah, yeah, it's beautiful, and it's a beautiful practice.
And my favorite is, the loving kindness one, which is nearly 5,000 years old, but you think about, your family and your friends, and then you send good wishes to your enemies.
Yes,
Um, and then, of course, you do the same blessing for yourself. May you be happy, may you be healthy, may you be loved. I did it at a really big business conference in Adelaide, Fran, and I'd given the keynote speech on day one, and they said, "Oh, look, would you come and do that loving kindness meditation first thing in the morning on day two?" And I'm expecting, 10 people or, like the priest in Norwich where it was just
yeah.
him and me. But absolutely everyone turned up with their
So
spouses. And do you know when the men cried? Can you
go
imagine?
on.
They cried when I said, look at yourself in the mirror and say, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you be loved. There were actually tears in the eyes of some of the men because of the difficulty of self love.
Yeah, 100%, and wow, that's there's a whole, like, there's a whole rabbit hole we could go down there because, that is the first thing, isn't it? When you look at the levels of mental health, when you look at, mental well-being and, the unfortunately, the high rate of suicide, and it's about that self-love, being able to love yourself first, and then to be able to go out and help the rest of the world. And, Victor, when you have, like you and I, we're very blessed. We have an optimistic outlook naturally. And, that isn't it, that is a gift. And I just love the way that you use your gift to be able to go out there and help other people because not everybody has that confidence. Not everybody has that inner just knowing that they're doing a good thing or, some people don't have a sense of purpose or a sense of belief in themselves. And, the levels of people, as you know, I coach. And, sometimes people come to me and they're hopeless. They have no self-esteem. And, when you said that, that made me quite sort of I do get a bit emotional, but, that's okay too, because I think I respect now that having a gift of optimism is just we're just blessed.
Yeah. But every one of your listeners and viewers can try this trick.
Go on.
When you greet someone, don't say, how are you? Because in Australia and in Austria and in France, if you say, how are you, you get an answer that is not bad or not too bad. And we never say, oh my God, what's wrong? We just, if your listeners think of the hundreds of wasted conversations,
Yeah.
how are you? Not bad, not too bad. And of course,
I'm
yesterday
good.
I said
I'm
to a
good.
young woman, I said, surely you've got a higher standard than that. So instead, for the next week, try this. What's been the best thing in your day? Hi, Jane. Hi, Fran. Hi, Victor. Oh, what's been the best thing in your day so far? 50% of people will give you an answer almost straight away. 30% will go, oh gosh. And then 20% are having a bad day. And of course, a bad day shared is generally, badness hard. But even the other week, I was with a very senior government official, and I opened the conversation with, what's been the best thing in your day? And he frowned and he saw, to be frank, Victor, I think it was that first cup of coffee I had. And of
Mm,
course, I could then ask him, well, what coffee do you drink? And
yeah.
where did you
Yeah.
drink it? And
It's a conversation.
it starts, but it's biased. And of course, as he said to me, Victor, that is so clever
Mm,
because it's biased to the positive. What's been the best thing in your day rather than how is your day?
yeah.
You're
I
turning
always
people to
use
the
it.
best.
Since I first met you a few years ago, I always use that now, and I love it because um, it's an immediate conversation starter. Even sort of even somebody. I mean, I talk to everyone anyway. I mean, my kids are always like, do you have to
Nah.
you have to make 1,000 friends, sort of just walking down the street, and it's like that's me, kids, and that, like sometimes it'll be the well, it's better at least I don't have to listen to you singing in the supermarket. I can do that too.
I went for a long drive with my daughter across America, and 17-year-old girls don't talk to their dad every minute of a long trip. So every now and again, I stick my chat GBT into the car kit and tell me about this town we're driving through, and what was its role in the Revolutionary War, and this forest we're driving through in Vermont. Tell me about the trees. And
Did she
eventually,
jump on
after
the
about 20
median
minutes,
here?
Sophia would say, "That's enough, Dad. I'll talk to you again."
Oh, well, that's it. You know what? Conversation is an important thing. So,
So the nice thing, Fran, if there's no one in front of us, we can always talk to our AI now.
exactly. And we can have a jolly good chat and it's very polite. Well, it's actually as polite as you are to it. So, and yeah, we could go off down that one, but I mean, that's it. That's also show that communication is the response that you get. So I love playing with my AI because I've really taught it to. I've done a lot of work in actually creating sort of my brand, and so it knows how to talk to me. So I do. If I'm feeling a bit devilish, I will play with it and see what comes back.
Well, mine has got my book loaded into it, the website. It's not allowed to use the word but. It has to
Oh,
use
good,
appreciative inquiry, not critical thinking.
excellent.
So it's and I offer it to other people to use. So anyone who wants to use Victor's ChatGPT, my son sometimes says it's a bit nauseatingly positive, but anyone who wants to try, if you use ChatGPT, just look for Victor Perton's
I love
ChatGPT.
that. I'm going to have a go at that later on. Victor, going back to when you were 30, I mean, there was a lot going on. There was a lot going on in the world. There was a lot going on in the life of Victor Perton, and obviously a lot going on in Victoria. So, what was your biggest dream at that time?
I think I wanted to be prime minister or premier. So in terms of personal dreams, and then that other dream, when I was a young child already, I was playing games about liberating the people from the Soviet Union. So I think there were two dreams. One was the personal, rise to the top of the political system. And then on the other side, what can I do to support, this liberation movement? And luckily enough, my grandmother was still alive and living in Lithuania and, determined to help bring freedom. So I could give her and my aunt and cousin some support on that front. So, yeah, so if I think about dreams at that point, one was reaching the peak of leadership in politics, and on the other hand, making a difference to people's freedom.
Mm,
And human rights was big. I was very active in human rights. I'd been a barrister. I was still a barrister, and I had the canvas over the years that followed on really supporting human rights and legal systems that supported human rights. And I went to South Africa not long after apartheid collapsed. I went to Rwanda not that long after the genocide to make those contributions. So I was able to make those contributions, and I'm still able to make those contributions. So that continues.
and did life take you where you expected then, or there was at one point there was a change?
Yeah, look, I think I've always followed my curiosity. So 2006, I'd had enough, 18 years in political office. Yeah, some people can be there 25, 30 years, but for me, with everything that was going on with my life, etc., I thought that was enough.
Yeah.
And then following my curiosity, first I was in my own business doing some really interesting consulting around high tech, and then I
Mm.
became commissioner to the Americas, selling foreign direct investment into Australia, promoting Australian exports across North and South America from, Canada and the US down to Chile and Argentina and Peru. And so that was utterly exciting and interesting. And as you know, when you go to America, the Americans just have this stereotype of we Aussies as relentless optimists. as the sort of person you want at your barbecue or to have a beer with. And I still
Absolutely.
remember Governor Perry of Texas, and you spent a bit of time in
I
Texas.
do. I
He
do.
hosted a reception for a delegation I'd brought in over a barbecue, and he said, "Oh, we Texans, we're the lost tribe of Australia." So it was an incredible
Well,
experience living on the dock of the
mm,
bay. You know, if we think back to the songs of my youth, Sitting on the Dock of the Bay by Otis Redding, literally, I was living on the dock of the bay.
amazing.
And so that was incredible. I had an office in New York, in Chicago. We opened one in Washington. So I was living really a dream life. And then after that, I had, you know, for someone who loves public policy, I then became one of the senior advisors to the G20 presidency.
All right.
So, you
Okay.
know, the economic
Yeah,
group.
yeah.
And so that was incredible again, too, you know, sort of doing policy and negotiations at that incredible level of, you know, country leaders and
Mm.
finance ministers. And, you know, sometimes I got to do just the fun stuff, you know, like that family photo, you know, where they all stand. Have you ever tried to tell the president of a country who just took the cop off us, he has to stand in the second row? So there was that really practical, Mr. President, you're standing there, and, you know, Madam
Yeah.
President, you're standing there. That was fun. And then after that, I came back to Melbourne and I was astonished by the negativity of language. You know, I had changed, you know, from living in
Yeah.
California and the like, but the evidence is that Australia has changed, that the language is negative in the midst of the greatest riches on earth. You know, no country's got a better health system. You know, no country's got better clean water or sewage. You know, the food, we go to the supermarket, we know it's going to be okay and not contaminated. And yet there's this constant on the news crisis. You know, the
Misery.
housing crisis, aged crisis. This week we've had the colour sand crisis. So there's a sort of madness, and rather than complain about it, I set off on the path of a project called the Australian Leadership Project. And we interviewed 2,500 people, from Bill George at Harvard to people at INSEAD to people on the factory floor. And I
Mm.
probably should have stopped at interview 22, Fran, because that was when Bill George said, Victor, there's nothing to worry about. Australian leadership's pretty good. But we concluded in the end that it was pretty good and
Mm.
characterized by three things that are pretty unique as a combination. One is egalitarianism. You know, you talk to the cleaner or the painter the same way you talk to the chairman.
Yeah.
Two, self-effacing humor. We do laugh at ourselves. And
Do
then
you think
third,
so?
traditionally, that's the traditional humor, the traditional humor. And then the third one is no bullshit. You know, as the Russian finance minister said to me, I never die wondering what you'll think, Victor. But at the end of the project, we were still left bewildered as to why Australians had become so negative.
Mm.
You would love, Fran, my eureka moment was 6 months later. I was on the final panel of the Global Integrity Summit. And after 3 days of misery, I changed my speech to the case for optimism. And it electrified the room. And
And that's where it
so my
started.
revelation was the problem was not the problem of leadership. The
Mm.
problem is the fog of pessimism. Helen
Mm.
Clark, you know,
Mm.
the former New Zealand Prime Minister and then head of the United Nations Development Programme, said, Victor, turn that into a book and I will endorse it. And in that sense, that's the pathway to which I became that optimism man.
I absolutely love that. Looking back, Victor, at when you were 30, what was something that you were completely wrong about?
I So without naming names and the like, I thought if you worked hard and you were good, you'd be promoted and, you know, get to the top. And I was in an environment where there was a leadership that demanded absolute loyalty, even when they were wrong. And I think my whole generations of family upbringing and the like was the emperor's got no clothes, the emperor's got no
Yeah,
clothes. If this is
that's right.
bullshit, it's bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was in a party environment. You see it now in both of the major parties in Australia. You know, you've got to be loyal to the leader, and you know the
Mm.
journalists are constantly saying, you know, do you support the leader? And same in the Greens. I mean, they were expelling people the other day, And that's never really suited me. I think it took me quite a long time to work out that being a parliamentarian and having to accept people who'd been utterly disloyal to the leader before, then demanding loyalty to the new leader,
Yeah.
was just not me. So I think when I think back to what I was wrong on, maybe I was a little bit naive about the state of Western democracy. And my entire ethos is against authoritarianism, it's against dictatorship. What I did find bewildering was the level of authoritarianism within democratic parties. And all people, if people want to think about it, just watch the news.
Yeah.
And, there's a lady senator who everyone knew she'd voted against the leader. Everyone knew she didn't like the leader. And the media says, oh, well, do you support her now? And of course, she says nothing. And that's the headline.
Yeah.
So we've got a media that feeds this as well. So for me, I suspect, when people talk about the weaknesses in Australian democracy, I don't think they are so bad that we need to be in a panic and it's not a crisis. But I think, organisations like the Department of Home Affairs, Australian Public Service Commission, the Lowy Institute, and the like, have identified this problem of more and more people being attracted to authoritarianism, rather than that old liberal democracy, going back to the Eureka Stockade,
Mm.
going back to Federation of Australia, this sort of idealism and you can be whatever you want. I think there's always dangers in the contemporary media environment of authoritarianism, even within vibrant democracies.
Mm.
And people get confused. Why doesn't my local member speak out on climate, or why doesn't my local member speak out on migration? And it's because we've developed these almost internal authoritarian
Yeah.
systems within our democracy. So for me, when I think back, there was a level of naivety at age 30, and I still have some of that naivety or idealism, you could phrase it
Idealism.
better.
Yeah.
So I still have that idealism, but, you do see it time and time again in Australian politics, this unnecessary authoritarianism and this unnecessary party discipline.
Yeah, and that look, I mean, I've never been involved in politics and I've never been, but I do find it when you sit on the outside and you look at it, the hypocrisy within sort of what goes on, and maybe that's a strong word and one I shouldn't have used, but a lot of it doesn't make sense to me.
It might look hypocritical. It's slightly different. It's the party rules. When the majority vote on something, party in the Labor Party, because you get expelled if you cross the floor. The Liberal Party at least has the right to cross the floor, but
Yeah,
when you cross the floor, there's a lot of people who don't make you feel good about it.
I don't make it back. Oh, that's fair enough. So, Victor, they say life's the best teacher, and sometimes those lessons come wrapped in disaster. So, let's talk about the biggest curveballs that life has thrown you, whether it was in business, relationships, politics. What's one experience that at the time you actually thought was the worst thing ever? It felt like the worst thing ever, but it probably ended up shaping who you are now.
But I think, like many men and women, it was the divorce.
Yeah.
And, yeah, these things happen, without sort of going into all the
Yeah.
details. If I just say my divorce, um, probably had the biggest negative impact on me. And, I think for most people who get divorced, it has echoes and ripples for the rest of your life.
Mm.
So, but last night, my daughter was at her final speech night at school, and you know the school well because your
I
daughter
do.
went there
My
as
daughter
well.
went with it.
And
Yeah.
Jane and I are sitting together, and
Yeah.
we won the award. My daughter's a very accomplished rower, and we won the award from the other parents of rowing as saying we were the best divorced couple. So I think so what's been interesting is, my clear answer to you is that is the worst thing that's happened to me.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, well, now it's nearly 13 or 14 years later.
Mm.
As I said, the funny thing is, you two, you're the best divorced couple in the rowing fraternity.
That's lovely. What was the hardest part about that experience?
Access to children, child custody, how much time you spend with the children. As you know, in the Australian system, men get much less of the care and the like. So I think for me, that was probably the hardest. But, the kids now, the relationship is so strong. My
Yeah,
son, lives interstate but rings me every day and the like,
that's
and we
nice.
talk. And Sophia, lovingly the other day said, when she was talking about potential exam results, and she said, "Oh, it doesn't matter to Dad. He just adores me." S
You being set up there.
Yeah, exactly. I don't the word might not have been adored, but, admires or the like. And so I think it's all worked itself out in the end. And
Yeah,
that fact, if we go back to Mother Julian of Norwich, who I visited the cell that she prayed in, her famous phrase, which is still the stuff of song and poetry, "All shall be well, all shall be well, all manner of things shall be well," still resonates. And John Lennon's riff on that, which was, "If it hasn't worked out, it's not the end."
yeah,
I think it's proved to me over the years that it all works out in the end.
I love that. So, I mean, if you could go back and whisper advice to yourself, during that time now, what would you say?
I don't think there's any advice I could give me. Yeah, well, it's just, and you talk to other people and, other men and women who've been in that position. And, you have lots of people who are happy to be sounding boards and give you advice. But I don't think there's anything my current self could tell my then self,
Mm,
that would have made me any happier about the situation.
no, and that's fair. That's fair. So, did that challenge in your personal life, did that change the way that you approach success today?
Very good question. And I don't think so. I think, when I look at what I'm doing now, I've just finished 10 years on the board of a water company and 4 years on the board of another water company. And what's been really nice is the speeches people have made have been so nice that I've got such a unique manner
Mm, mm,
that, I wear you're old enough to remember De Bono's yellow hat.
yes.
So I wear the yellow hat at the board. I use appreciative inquiry. I'm looking for the positive. As Daniel Wood, the head of the Productivity Commission, said the other day, you need to have a growth mindset. Or what's his name? Oh, I'm
Sorry.
having a mental blank on the former head of ANZ who advised Prime Minister Gillard. As he said, you bring your whole self to the board. You bring your future self to the board. And I even used that recently at the Melbourne 2050 conference where I asked those around me, I said, "Well, where are we going to be in 2050? How can we tell the government what we want them to do in 2050 unless we know where we're going to be?" I said, in 2050, I'll be 92. So I'm hoping it's going to be a good city for optimistic old men who love to dabble in public policy.
I'm pretty sure you'll still be there.
Yeah, so I think, as I look at myself now, I'm teaching public policy. I had a lovely note from a guy the week before last. He said, "You are the first person to ever tell me to equate joy with writing a new policy proposal." So I think I've managed to really link up that notion of joy and optimism, applying it in work. So for me, I've got the Centre for Optimism, which is, the my passion and the like. I'm really embedded in the water sector, which can often have a scarcity mentality, and I'm really trying to help drive it to an abundance mentality. And then I have this pleasure of being involved in public policy and trying to make people feel that there are as many opportunities as there are problems. So I think I'm where I'm at because I was always designed to be like this at this age.
Yeah.
And in fact, I was listening to a really interesting podcast the other day on the way our neurons work and the way we think. And in some senses, and my son is just going to visit my mum's hometown in Latvia. And so I was just doing him a little historical piece on our ancestor who moved from Sweden to Liepaja in 1840. And what must the town have looked like? And what must have he experienced? And so if I think back to what I know of my ancestors back to the late 1700s,
Mm,
through to now, there's always been this struggle, against invaders and authoritarian people. And so I think, yeah, maybe it's genetic, maybe it's imprinted on the neurons, but it's certainly the stories. My mother was a refugee twice, she was widowed twice. She was always content and she was always funny. And she was always saying hello to everyone. It didn't matter what stranger there was, she would have a conversation. So there was mum, and there was grandmother, and my grandfathers. And so, yes, I think I was probably conditioned, genetics,
Wow.
whatever, programmed to be what I am now.
Yeah, and look, I 100% agree. You know, the neurons definitely, and that's why we can change our behavior, because when we change that, when we change those neurons and we change, you know, we are so good at focusing on what we don't want. Everyone that you talk to, you know, when I start coaching, you start talking to people, and you say, "So, what do you want? What are you looking at?" I don't know. Okay. All right. No, but I don't want this. I don't, no, 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 not going there. What do you want?
What would you like for dinner? Oh, I don't want fish.
Why do we do that? But that actually affects the way that we think. So when we start to focus on something different, I do believe that the motor neurons also change, which then allows us to focus on the positive. And, you know, but, you know, going back to what you were talking about, the negativity within Australia and the pessimism within Australia, we've built those neuro pathways. And now it's about how do we change that? Because when you're optimistic, when you're I've done a lot of work as well in neuro-linguistic
I know,
programming
yeah.
and yeah, and when you start to I was the neg, I was. And, you know, when I went through major changes in life, I knew exactly what I didn't want. I knew all about duty, what I was supposed to do, what I should do. But could I say what I wanted? No, because I was a mother, a wife, you know, sort of a business owner. Everything was, but I didn't know who I was. And I had to rebuild that. And it took me probably the best part of a year working with a wonderful therapist, Kim, who just kept saying to me, "But what do you want?" Well, I want the children. I want this. I want, no, associate. What do you want? What do you want for you? Who are you? What do you want to do with your life? And once I actually got the hang that and gave myself permission that that was actually okay to be what I wanted, the whole world changed. Now, I've always been a hugely optimistic person. I've always been driven. I've always done, but I hadn't realized that I was doing it for everybody else.
And you know, my mother, like you, is such a strong rap for brain plasticity.
Mm.
And that's why I don't, when I give my presentations on optimism, I never say, take it was unusual. I got an email this week from someone who'd taken up 5 of my suggestions
Yeah,
and had
amazing.
found it successful. But I think it's easy, on smiling and saying hello to everyone.
Mm.
Daddy Janki, who headed up the Brahma Kumaris until she was 103, she said most people have trouble smiling. So if you can do it, give people a genuine smile. And then there's that greeting. Gratitude journaling is so powerful. But you're like this, Fran, back in the late 90s, she said, "Oh, you're a busy sort of guy, aren't you?" I was a bit suspicious of that question.
Yeah.
And so
What's coming
firstly she said,
next?
"Oh, look, meditating, maybe it's hard for you to find 10 or 15 minutes. What about meditating 1 minute 1 minute an hour?" And of course, these days, the Apple Watch, prompts you every hour to stop for a minute. But the other thing you'd love is her time management rules, which I now still pass on to people, 27 years later. Um, she said, "If someone asks you to do something and it's gonna bring you great joy, then say yes.
Yeah,
Is it something that is going to make you or your organization better? If you've got the time, say yes. And then there's the stuff you must do, and that answers itself.
yeah,
Everything else is a waste of time." And then she said, "And just imagine when you're looking at your diary, Victor, and God's looking over your shoulder saying, 'Are you really gonna spend your time on that?' So I think that's the ultimate test. Are you really going to waste your time on that thing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Becoming intentional changes life, changes everything.
But
Changes
intentionally joyful.
I love
And in
that.
fact, recently, the head of the Harvard Kennedy School, Joe Nye, died. And mistakes made, not at age 30. When he offered me a job
Oh.
20 years ago, I should have taken it. But he, in his last communication with me, he said, never stop smelling the roses.
Mm,
And I have a beautiful rose garden. If I looked out over the computer now, I would see orange and yellow roses in my garden. And if I walk out the door now, it will smell of roses anyway. But that
beautiful.
notion of looking for joy. So when
Yeah.
you pass a rose, stop and smell it.
Mm,
When you pass someone, smile and say hello.
mm,
So look for the joy every day
yeah.
and every opportunity. And I was really lucky, Fran, about 3 years ago, this guy from Finland rang me, Andrew, and he said, I work with an organization called the Art and Science of Joy. And we're going to do a year of joy, and each month there's going to be a theme. Would you and the Center for Optimism be our first partner? People just tell me you're the right one. And so in the end, after the year, my bit of wisdom, Fran, is optimists are more joyful
Yeah.
and the joyful are more likely to be optimistic.
I love that. I love that. So let's get to the heart of the episode, Victor. And I know you maybe don't like looking back from where you are now, the age that you are now, and giving your 30-year-old self advice. But maybe it's sharing it for the good of our listeners. And if you could actually just go back and give your 30-year-old self 3 pieces of advice, what would they be?
That's a tough question, Fran. That's a tough because I was slim and exercised enough then. So I'd probably say keep exercising. But that's more advice for me at the age of 66. And for all of us who are 66 or older, keep exercising.
Mhm.
Probably be more my nickname at that stage was Smiley, the guards and the cleaners. I think I had that innate notion of smiling and saying hello to everyone, and one of my old colleagues said, "Victor, you used to give your enemies the shits because 'cause they'd be bad-mouthing you, and you'd walk into the room and give them a big smile and, how are the kids going?" and the like. So I wouldn't change any of that.
No.
I'd probably just be that question I use now rather than "How are you?" I think anyone of any age, if you're 90 or you're 30 or you're 17, ask people what's the best thing in your day.
Yeah.
The hard one is, look, should I have persisted in politics or not? And look, I think I would be unsatisfied. One of my colleagues did pull out quite early.
Mm,
He so hated the environment.
mm.
He left after one term. And I'm not sure that he ended up any happier than I did from having served 5 terms trying to have a go.
Yeah.
So I don't think I'd change, the life of politics. So yeah, probably all I would really tell a 30-year-old is be more infectiously optimistic. Ask people good questions. I'd probably teach myself appreciative inquiry, but I
Mm,
don't think it was even around when I was 30. I think, critical thinking and, sort of Socratic method was, the stuff we'd all been trained on. So that's stuff that's come to me later in life. So I'd tell the 30-year-old today, or the 60-year-old, or the
mm.
90-year-old to use appreciative inquiry, to ask questions that you used the expression earlier, Fran, strength-based.
Yeah.
So instead of focusing on our weaknesses or people's weaknesses, focus on our strengths. And as we build on those strengths, our weaknesses will become less and less relevant. And David Cooper Ryder, who's sort of the high priest of appreciative inquiry, he says, if you want to change a society, look at the questions you're asking yourself. And of course, the
Mm,
problem in Australia now is, every news journalist is trying to do a gotcha moment, or
mm.
they're asking the politician or the scientist about the crisis.
Yeah.
How can a country that's so good, Fran, have
Mm,
27 national crises, 3
mm.
national emergencies, and 4 national shames? That's
Yeah.
my list at the moment, Fran.
And it's insane because it's all about the drama hook, and you've gotta look at what that intention is, and it's fear. And I think
Fran, that is so wise. You're my friend John Hagel, and his book, The Power of Pull, Pull, I'd recommend
mm,
to all your listeners. It's 15 years
oh,
old. Maybe some of the
think about
social
that.
media stuff is a bit old. Really brilliant book. But his book after COVID, Fran,
Mm,
called The Journey Beyond Fear.
mm,
And what are the pillars, Fran? You exemplify it.
mm.
Curiosity and optimism. Curiosity and optimism. And if I look back at myself when I was 30, when I look at my pathway from 30 to 66, it was following my curiosity.
Because you weren't prepared to actually accept the fear-driven society that we kind of live in now.
Yeah, and I mean, the head of ASIO recently made a speech. I mean, part of it is foreign influence.
Mm,
The dictatorships, the enemies of Australian democracy, the people who want to subjugate us, they actually pay people to do this sort of stuff. There's And then you've got the fellow travellers. The newsrooms of Australia
yeah.
have been so infected. One journalist recently did a story on something I'd done, and I won't say whether it was he or she, because it would give it away, but just shared the bleakness of the newsroom and the
Mm,
bleakness of the chief of staff. And recently, I even saw two journalists tweeting. They'd been sent to do a positive story, and they said, "Gosh, what a rare thing." We are being hammered every day, Fran. And so the important thing about what you're doing, but for all of your listeners, share a story of good today.
mm.
Share or tell a joke. There was a slightly off-color joke an older lady told at a recent event I spoke at on last Tuesday. But tell off-color jokes. The audience was 99 ladies and me. I was the only bloke, and
Oh,
we all just
brilliant.
laughed our heads off at this off-color ladies joke.
And why not?
Yeah.
It's really, really powerful stuff and, difficult to pull, like, I guess, all of this into a short space of time. But do you think now that younger professionals and entrepreneurs are struggling with the same things that we did? Or do you think they're facing a completely different world? And I guess we've spoken about a lot of different
Do you know,
views on that.
I like to think about this question. It's a very good question, and you didn't prepare me for this one. So, Um, I still remember when first time I went to Lithuania, and I went swimming on a beach, where I knew my great-grandparents, my great-great-grandparents, and the ones before those. I knew
Mm,
they had promenaded on the waterfront, and I suspect, certainly the men had gone swimming. And as I swam in that water, I had a feeling that the Germans call the Heimat, the place of the heart.
mm.
And so, yeah, so I felt that, that notion of that in depth, and I've taken myself completely off track, Fran. Can you
It's
reframe that
okay.
question?
Yeah. So what we're talking about was, do you think like the younger professionals, yeah,
So,
are
so, so the point I was making is, I was thinking 200 years ago, they were going swimming. Um, they were, marrying. So much of life is still the same as it was 200 years ago, 1,000 years. The difference, of course, is that we live in this society where, if you cut your leg, you put antiseptic on it. You don't
yeah,
die.
you don't die.
Um, you've got high blood pressure. There are tablets for it.
Yeah, yeah.
And, for women now, the average lifespan in Australia is into the late 80s. For
Mm,
men, the mid 80s. So, yeah, in that sense, young people compared to even our day just live this incredible life.
mm.
The iPhone, AI, the new medicines, self-driving cars.
I
I took
know,
a Waymo in
auto-injectors.
San Francisco. God, I loved it. So I think, you know, there's all sorts of labels for it. There's VUCA, this notion of uncertainty and the poly crisis, as some economists call it. And yet people have never lived better
Yeah.
than they have. So I think there's certainly a velocity and imposition. So when I think back to those ancestors 200 years ago, they might have read the paper maybe every day or every week, and their conversations were so much more the conversations with their peers. So I think the impact of this constant bad news
Mm.
is there. We've got 1 in 5 Australians is now on an antidepressant.
No.
I don't know what the numbers are for anxiety. And then you add to that the other drugs that people take
Mm.
to self-medicate. So
Mm.
clearly something's happening. But on the other hand, Fran, last Saturday I was on the Yarra River, and there were 1,000 young rowers, from the age of 14 to, in fact, there were rowers all the age to the age of 90. But
Mm.
when you watch these young people in their late teens in physical health, singing, chanting, standing on the bridge, calling on things, I always think things are going to be okay, Fran.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
Mike Amor on Channel 7 the other day, we were on the longer interview, and he said, "Oh, Victor, a lot of people in Melbourne will think this optimism stuff, it's a load of rubbish." And I said, "Mike," and it was beautifully that he put it to me, because otherwise it would have looked too positive an interview. And I said to Mike, in a city of 5.5 million people, there's
Mm.
500,000 people who know they're optimists. There's 500,000 people who know they're pessimists. There's 4 million who've never thought about it. And
Yeah.
I said, Mike, if we can get 10,000 of the 500,000 optimists being more active and the like. And so I think the challenge for young optimists
Mm.
and young people in general is to do that appreciative inquiry, to
Yeah.
focus on the good, to focus on what's there, but yet understand that the optimist can be angry. The
Yeah.
optimist can be frustrated. The optimist can be in grief, death of a friend or death of a family member or divorce
Yeah.
or, the business
Whatever
going
the
bankrupt.
whatever the call is. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what shit happens to everyone.
Yeah.
And, you think back to Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning,
Mm.
that notion of whether you're in a
Amazing.
concentration camp
Yeah.
or you're in the easiness of living in Australia,
Yeah.
just do your best.
Yeah.
Just
And
do your best.
you choose how you're going to do it. And I think that is one of the things that for me, I watch people don't fully take responsibility for the choices that they make. We've got labels for everything, which means that when, that you can suddenly get put into a labeled pool of things and this is your, oh, well, that must be it because I'm this. No, it's a flow. We are a work in progress. Our life is a work in progress, but it's our choice. And if we can take that, then I think that's something that when we really truly understand that, it's a different world.
Well, you exemplify that. I mean, I know when we spoke about optimism, you said for you it's a mindset. Yeah, and mindset is a choice. So you've made a choice to be optimistic. You've made a choice to be infectiously optimistic. You've made a choice to help people find their pathway. This program is a choice to help people find their pathway. And,
Mm.
and you are the exemplar, Fran.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So, getting back on track, what's
Haven't
one
I
mind?
diverted you enough away from these questions on when I
No,
was
not
30?
yet, because you did warn me that you probably that you didn't like my questions.
No, I like the questions. I find them challenging.
What's what's the best advice you ever received, Victor, and who gave it to you?
I referred to it earlier, daddy junkie.
Yeah,
Look at
yeah,
your diary. Will it bring you joy? Will it advance you? Is it something you must do? Everything else is a waste of time.
fair enough,
And
fair enough.
meditate 1 minute an hour. That was also really good advice.
That's a beautiful one because it actually grounds everything and allows you to really ask the questions of like, am I really doing this? Do I
And
really need to be
technology
doing
has
this?
caught up with daddy
Oh,
janky. The
yes,
Apple
legally.
Watch alerts me every hour.
And you do your meditation. Amazing. That's so good for everything. So good for the body. It's so good for the brain. It's so good for the mind body connection. Okay. We've covered the deep stuff, and I know we could carry on talking all day. So let's have a bit of fun. I'm going to hit you with some really quick fire questions. What's the worst business or life advice you ever got?
I can remember the conversation, but it's hard to translate into action. It was someone who told me I was too quick and too witty, and I had to slow it down. And funnily enough, I was talking about that man yesterday.
Yeah.
He he said, particularly when I came from being a barrister to a parliamentarian, bringing the habits of the barrister of the, the quick-fired questions and the quick-fired jokes and repartee that some people found daunting. So I think whether he was right or wrong, I still remember it, and I still think it was the wrong advice.
Absolutely, because how did that make you feel for a start? And it's not your problem if he's not quick enough to keep up.
Yeah, but on the best piece of advice, the ladies in Hansard, in those days, the people who took the transcript in Parliament were all ladies, and they either used hands or a little machine,
Shorthand.
and they said, "Victor, you talk too fast." And so they got me talking at 40 words a minute less,
So
and
you had to be intentional
so that
about
was
that.
really good clarity in speaking, and also
Mm.
so the transcript would be more accurate.
And it probably did you a lot of good actually, because it would have taken away the ums, the buts, the all of those things, which now we can just remove with AI anyway. But
Almond butter is interesting because it slips back in. There's always some habit that slips back in. And you always need someone like the Hansard reporters or your
yeah,
sister or whatever who says, "Do you need to keep using that word?" So, yeah, good friends will tell you if you're using a word too often.
lovely. I love that. If you could have lunch with any historical figure, who would it be? And I'm really looking forward to this answer.
I've actually had lunch with a number of historical
I
figures,
know.
and one that I really, really enjoyed was Bill Clinton. It was a dinner. But if I think to that group that you're thinking of, even more historically, Um, I'd probably think Teddy Roosevelt, the turn of the century American president, the Rough Riders. And my son's called Teddy, so you can tell I had a real romance for Teddy Roosevelt. And then I think going back more ancient, I'd love one of the Crusader kings, say. And when I was young, we used to watch Robin Hood and all
Yeah.
those things. So I think Richard the Lionheart, I would
Mm.
really like to have at dinner. We probably wouldn't use forks then. We'd probably have
No.
to be eating with our hands. And then I think more contemporary, but also dead, George Orwell. Um,
Yes.
Love to talk to him about the Spanish Civil War and how that turned him into an anti-communist, and those great
Yeah.
books, Animal Farm and
Yeah.
1984. I think he'd be the author that I'd like to have there. My grandfather, Vladis Petronitis, who, with a rat pack of cousins, went to Russia in 1905, studied at university there, then taught at the Russian Military Academy, and then 1917, they came back to Lithuania,
Yeah.
formed an army, defeated the Soviets, defeated the remnant Germans, fought the Poles, and then, became a lawyer. And so he would be very interesting to have as a figure, particularly for that First World War,
Mm.
mid-war period. He would be very interesting to have there. If I kept thinking, I'd probably end up with 20 or 30,
Yes. And you're
Maybe
allowed
we'd even
one.
have Attila the Hun there to find out how
Who
they
would you be?
take so far.
Who would your pinnacle be if you could only take one? That's it. Only one on your table.
No, I couldn't pick between them. No, I
You
couldn't
don't
pick
have to.
between them.
It's fine. That's the nice thing. This is our podcast. We can do what
Because
we
you
like.
don't know, Richard the Lionheart might be quite boring.
He might. He might. You're right.
He doesn't know as much about world affairs as we do.
No. He just knew what was in front of him. That horse just kept going, and he just cleared it wherever. I guess did have a purpose. He did have an intention. He knew
And
where
I
he was
tell you another
going.
one, Epicurus would be interesting. Epicurus, the Greek philosopher, and when you have a dinner, you should always think of the people first, the place second, and then the food. much
Mm.
misinterpreted in the West, Epicurean habits, whereas
Yes, yeah.
Epicurus actually lived quite a simple life. The other one I wouldn't mind, but very recent history,
We've got a
is
massive
Pope
table now. This
Benedict.
is a big table.
Pope Benedict I'd like.
Okay.
Yeah, I never met him. I only, saw him afar on television and the like.
Mm.
But the most popular web page on my website is "All shall be well, all shall be well, all manner of
Yeah.
things shall be well." And a sermon he delivered on Mother Julian of Norwich is there. And it's just beautifully written,
Mm.
beautifully written. I have a bit of a debate with the last pope and the current pope because they love hope and poo-poo optimism. Where it seems to me that Benedict managed to combine both an optimistic and hopeful
Mm.
mindset.
Mm. And I think he was right. What's a guilty pleasure you refuse to apologize for?
A dark chocolate with almond,
Nice.
Krupnikus, Lithuanian mead brandy, steak tartare, a
I don't think that's a good I don't think steak
hard-boiled egg
tartare is a
with
guilty pleasure.
mayonnaise, caviar, and American-style Eskel herring. You probably get a
Wow.
sponsorship from Eskel now.
Yes, thank you very much. I love that.
Schnitzel, I do love a schnitzel.
Well, we've got a good schnitzel we definitely have a good schnitzel in Australia, and,
Well, in fact, can
certainly
I tell you a funny one, Fran? I mean, I know this is quick
of
fire.
course you can.
A couple of Americans were coming over and they said, "Oh, Victor, we'd like to take you to dinner." And being a typical Melburnian, I said, "Oh, you want to go French or Italian or Chinese?" "No, no, we want to go Australian."
Brilliant.
And I'm thinking, "Oh, no, a Parma in a pot?"
That was your first thing. That was all you could come up in Melbourne as to
No, thankfully, my
it's
former
hilarious.
wife, Jane, said there's a fabulous restaurant in South Yarra. So Matilda, which is ultra
Matilda. I knew it's
expensive,
got big,
but
yeah.
we managed to have kangaroo tartare and those sorts of things.
Amazing. Well, I was going to say that was my first thing. What about Scott's Matilda? But, as you know, I come from the food industry, so I've had the absolute pleasure of traveling the world eating in some of the top restaurants, which has been amazing.
Look, well, in that case, we could add tour d'argent and it's pressed duck.
Perfect.
I could
We could
add
go all day.
garlic snails,
Yeah, not a fan.
steak tartare.
Steak tartare, yes, absolutely. Not sure how no, I guess, one of the chefs that I had on the show a few weeks ago, Sam Burke, is the head of the Meat and Livestock Association, the head chef there. So he would do a beautiful Australian beef steak tartare.
Beautiful. I had the good fortune to know Guy Grossi, who, of course, has just retired from his
Yes,
current
I
business.
know,
But
yes. We
gosh,
were
I tell
actually
you what a
there on
guilty
Saturday.
pleasure, Fran, would be his milk-fed lamb.
Beautiful, beautiful. So we really are very, very spoilt in Melbourne for our
Fran, something else
wonderful
I
chefs.
discovered the other day,
Go on.
sour granny. It's a it's a type of apple cider grown just outside of Melbourne, made from
Yeah.
Granny Smith apples. And it's
Brilliant.
only 3
Sour
or
granny, I love
2%
that.
alcohol, and, so you can drink this refreshing drink in summer.
So did you tell them that sour granny has a negative connotation, so we now want one called joyful granny?
Now, it was so funny when I ordered the first, box direct from the winery, the lady actually rang me up and said, "Would you like some of our red cider as well?" And they sent that to me as a gift, which was very nice.
Lovely, I love that. So if your 30-year-old self, Victor, had a theme song, what would it be?
Oh, well, that's an easy one because we had it for the election campaign. When the going gets tough, the tough get going gets rough. And then the other one that I really love and that Bill Clinton used in '92 was, of course, "Don't stop thinking about tomorrow. Don't stop. It'll soon be here." But very eclectic music tastes. I love, Burt Bacharach. I'm probably the only person who can sing all of the songs from the 1973 version of Lost Horizon. Answer me a question, right or wrong. You can answer with a question, right or wrong. Even though your answer may be wrong, your question may be right. And then, of course, living in San Francisco and having to drive to Silicon Valley. Do you know the way to San Jose?
Brilliant. So you would love Smooth Vintage. Do you listen to Smooth Vintage?
No,
I do. Check it out. Tell Alexa or Siri, play Smooth Vintage. It's wonderful.
I will.
It's our area. So Victor,
Very long. I've got a very long Optimists playlist
playlist.
on my
Brilliant.
Apple. So it starts these days because it didn't even exist then. My favorite song oh Optimistic by August Green.
I don't know, but
And
I will, well,
the funny
maybe I
thing
do.
is, there was a little school called Stowe Primary School in Scotland, Fran.
Yeah.
The teacher read them my book, Optimism, the How and Why, and
Oh,
the kids got
lovely.
together with their music teacher and did a rap version of Optimistic. So you've got these
Brilliant.
8 kids with strong Glasgow accents singing, "Oh, pig." If anyone wants to
Brilliant.
look that up on Facebook or on Google,
I
Stowe
will.
Primary
Absolutely.
School,
So
Optimistic.
primary school. That's fantastic. I love that. So, Victor, getting you back on the questions, what's one thing you absolutely sucked at in your 30s, but you've mastered now?
I know I penciled an answer, but I have no recollection of
What
what
it
it
was?
is. There's nothing I really feel I sucked at then. I was a typical 30-year-old and, doing what 30-year-olds do.
No, you weren't. I don't think anything was typical. You're in Victorian government. That's not typical.
Yeah, and there's nothing. I mean, my golf could have been better. I did have a bad slice on my golf. I never rectified the bad slice on my golf. I don't know why I couldn't fix that. So that's probably the one. I think
Your
I
golf.
had a bad slice playing golf.
Brilliant. I love that. Victor, that was incredible. I know so many of our listeners are going to resonate with the stories, many of them. But before we wrap up, let's do a quick recap. What's the single, and I know we're going to have a problem with this, single, just one. What's the single biggest takeaway that you would like people to remember from this conversation? And actually, I was wrong to say that because I know that you have a very strong purpose, and I'm sure you will be able to give an answer.
But just do this for the next week. Replace "How are you?" with "What's been the best thing in your day?" And 80% of your conversations will include a beautiful shared story. And it could be as simple as someone had a nice cup of coffee through to they had some breakthrough in their career or their life. So just remember that. And the next time, if you're watching this on video,
Hmm.
I'm slapping my forehead. If you say, "G'day, how are you?" and the person says, "Not bad" or "Not too bad," say to yourself, "Oh, that was a wasted question." So ask people what's been the best thing in your day.
Brilliant. I love that. And for everyone listening, here's my challenge to you. Take one thing, that one thing from today's episode, and apply it to your life this week. Maybe it's reaching out to someone who can mentor you. Maybe it's finally taking that leap that you've been scared of. Whatever it is, take action. And if this episode inspired you, please make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have a question or a topic you'd like to cover in a future episode, send me a message. I would love to hear from you. Thank you for tuning in to What I Wish I Knew at 30. From my guest, Victor Perton, thank you so much for joining me, Victor.
Fran, it's been wonderful. As I said, the question was one that daunted me, but making me settle back and think about those things and going back and reading the speech I made 2 months before I was 30. Gee, you know the terrible thing, Fran?
Go on.
I haven't changed.
I don't believe that, not one bit. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to What I Wish I Knew at 30. And remember, your best chapters are still ahead. You can make that choice. So we look forward to seeing you next time. So, from myself, Fran Harper, your host at What I Wish I Knew at 30, and from Victor Perton, it's goodbye for now.